Hey everybody, and welcome to Under the Hat this week. We're delighted to have Tara Collingwood join Gavin and myself. Tara is an internationally acclaimed performance nutritionist, has worked with the Orlando Magics before, recently as well has started her relationship with the WWE, is a consultant dietitian to an advisor to UCF, University of Central Florida, and the US Tennis Association, has wrote a numerous amount of books and as a speaker as well. Tara, we're delighted that you could join us today. And the world of performance nutrition and nutrition as a whole, I think Gavin and I both agree in the world of golf is something that is massively overlooked. There is so much information around fitness and technique and putting and the mindset and the mental game and course strategy, and on Google and YouTube and books there's countless pieces of advice. But when you come to look for really good, solid nutritional advice, how to fuel your body and mind, I've always found it really difficult to find some good information. So it'd be great to hear from you today, the questions that Gavin and I have lined up for you, and also kind of hear a little bit about your experiences. So welcome to Under the Hat.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I might be a little bit biased, but I agree with you that there's a definite lack of nutrition information out there. And, throughout my career, you mentioned all the affiliations I've had, but I've obviously worked with some individual golfers throughout the past 20 years of my sports nutrition career. And they're every bit as much, needing nutrition advice as any other athlete that I work with. So I agree. Let's get this started.
Yeah, no, let's dive on into it. So I think for me, one of the big things is, we're all coaches, and everybody listening to this, we're all involved in the coaching world. And before we get stuck into the nitty gritty of kind of nutrition 101 and the best practices and some of the pitfalls that coaches or athletes fall into, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey to where you are at this point, how you got into the field that you're in and the expertise that you have, and some of your learnings or inspirations along the way that can maybe help guide some of our coaches to be signposted, I guess, in one or two directions to learn a little bit more about how they can improve their knowledge outside of just this Zoom session.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm one of those rare individuals that knew back in high school what I wanted to do as my career. And so when I went to college, I double majored in exercise physiology and nutrition and sports nutrition so that I could really, and back then, it wasn't really much of a thing. There were very few pro teams that even had nutritionists. Hardly any colleges were working with, sports dietitians. And so, really in the last 20, 25 years, it's really exploded in terms of, being out there as a career, but also more and more athletes are paying attention to how they're fueling their body. And so, I'm personally a marathon runner and, 5 a.m. exerciser in my own right. And so, I care about it and think about it for myself in addition to, working with the athletes that I do. And, I always tell athletes that there's kind of three things that go into your performance. One is your genetics. So thank mom and dad for the genetics that got you to where you are and the ability to do the sport that you're doing. The other is the training. So thank your coaches, physios, all of those people that help you to, again, get to where you are. And the third thing is the fuel that you're putting into your body. And a lot of times, as we've already mentioned, that gets left off, that, oh, I'm young and invincible, or, oh, I've heard it all. I've heard it all in terms of excuses as to why they're not paying attention to what's going into their body. But especially the older we get and the higher level that the athlete gets, it becomes more and more important. So, depending on what your goals are, is dependent on how serious you can get with, your nutrition. So, we were joking before we started about drinking on the course and all of that kind of stuff. And for the average weekend golfer, if they want to have a couple beers on the course, fine. But when we're talking about really, how do you want to perform and how do you want to focus, and, is this as competitive as you want to be, then that's when we start getting serious about what's going into the body as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great place to start, is with hydration, talking about drinking. I've heard on numerous occasions from people that I've talked to, not particularly yourself, but other dietitians in the past, or people that have been based around that kind of whole performance lifestyle, that the number one cause for poor performance within athletes is dehydration. And I just wondered what your thoughts would be around the whole hydration and dehydration for athletes, and the importance of it and the benefits of being correctly hydrated, and then a little bit of how you would go about making sure you are hydrated, and the right balance between, not just drinking water, but any other drinks or whatever else you think is important.
Sure. Yeah, we know that even when you get, 1% of dehydration, and definitely up to 5%, that's when it starts getting dangerous in terms of your health. But even just a little bit of dehydration can affect your focus. And of course, golf is not as physical as some of the other athletes that I work with, although we do know that, of course, it's physical, but it's a huge mental game. And so that's where golf, I think that's why nutrition hasn't been quite as high on the list for a lot of people, because it's not as physical as a lot of other sports, tennis or marathon running or something like that. But it's still just as important. And that is one of the major side effects of dehydration, is just that tiny bit of loss of focus. So one of the major things that I've learned in even just recent years of working with athletes, especially, I'm based in Orlando, Florida, but golf is often played during, of course, the nice summer months or hot months, humid months, or in places that are hot and humid all year round. And so you're sweating. And of course, we're going to lose some hydration in our sweat, but it's not even just the sweat. It's also breathing. If you go like this, your hand is a little bit moist from just, that. So just breathing is going to dehydrate you. That's why when we wake up in the morning, if you've been sleeping for 8 hours or more, you're dehydrated because you've been breathing and not taking anything in overnight. So we're always going to become more dehydrated as we go through the day if we're not taking in some fluid. And one of the things I started to say that I've really noticed with athletes is the sodium. So when we're sweating, the number one thing that we lose in our sweat is sodium. I mean, besides fluid, but the number one electrolyte. So you always hear about potassium and magnesium, and so little potassium and magnesium compared to the sodium. So, and that's where, this is what differentiates an athlete from the regular population, is that you hear that salt is bad and sodium is bad, and you have to watch this, and blood pressure and all these different things. But when you're an athlete, you need carbohydrates to give you energy. You need sodium to replenish that sweat. And so those are the two things that I really focus on with athletes: is how much are you drinking? How much are you losing? And then also, where is, how much are you losing in terms of sweat? And, I also have a machine that can actually measure the amount of sodium in your sweat. And so that has become, I just got that machine, 4 years ago. And that has been huge in my practice of now being able to tell someone, okay, everyone here on the call can be totally different levels of sodium that we lose in our sweat. I'm actually not a very salty sweater, and I'm not a very heavy sweater. Even when I'm running in the heat, of course I'm sweating, but I'm not going to be sweating buckets like someone else might be. So it's how much are you losing, but it's also the concentration of your sweat. So it's those two things. A lot of times what I'll do with athletes is have them weigh themselves before and after a practice session, or, a whole round of golf or something, and see how much did you lose? And you have to take off your sweaty shirt in order, because that's still going to be holding the salt. So that's one of the things that we look at is, you know, and you didn't lose fat while you were on the course. It's all hydration. And so that gives us an idea of how much you actually lose, which then can help us moving forward to know how much do I need to take in.
Yeah, quick question from me. When you start working with athletes, in your experience, what percentage of athletes that come to work with you are generally constantly dehydrated, or are they quite good in your experience at being quite good at looking after themselves? Because I worked at a junior academy for 5.5 years, and I think the youngsters, I would say probably on average, were not great at really taking on the fluids that they should. Now, I think they were probably constantly slightly dehydrated, but I'm not the expert. I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts in terms of your experience.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I had to move. My yard guy is blowing and it was really loud and the dog started barking. So sorry, I'll move back in a minute.
That's rude.
So I think it really, you know, this is the fun of Zoom from home, right? So I think it really depends, you know, and clinical, quote unquote, clinical dehydration is different than just dehydration for performance. So like I said, you know, in order to be hospitalized and need an IV bag, you have to be really, really dehydrated. But for just having a slight bit of, you know, change in your focus and a little bit of reaction time that's going to be off, that could be just a little bit of dehydration. So I would say that often I see people who, you know, start their round dehydrated. And then, you know, again, if you're already starting behind the 8 ball, now you're just getting further and further behind, and it becomes difficult really to play catch up. So, I mean, percentage wise, I don't know if I can, you know, really say, and, you know, it's hard to assess, you know, each person for dehydration, because it is one of those things that, you know, one of the things that I recommend the most to know whether you're properly hydrated is to look at the color of your urine. So if it's barely yellow or even clear, you know, some people are like, my urine's like almost clear. Is that okay? Is that bad? Yeah. The more clear, the better, because that means that your body is nice and hydrated. Of course, in the morning, it's going to be a little bit more concentrated, which is, you know, a sign that we're dehydrated from overnight. But, you know, as the day goes on, if your urine is barely yellow or even clear, that means that you're properly hydrated. So, you know, and if you're not going to the bathroom every couple hours, that means, again, that you're not properly hydrated. So, you know, just paying attention to some of those things, like how often am I going to the bathroom, and, you know, how much am I drinking throughout the day? And it doesn't have to be just plain water. Everything hydrates us. So your milk, your juice, your, you know, your tea, alcohol and caffeine, kind of, I use those as like it's not really hydrating you, but it's not really dehydrating you. So, you know, we know that those are diuretics, but they're also made out of water. So I don't necessarily count against for the caffeine and alcohol, but it's not necessarily going to be as hydrating as some of those other beverages.
Yeah, no, perfect. Now, I think obviously, you know, as a coach, we tend to deal with players predominantly before they play. So it's a lot of training time, range time, sat discussing, you know, working on the practice area. And then there's the time during the round, which unfortunately in the world of modern day high level and elite golf is torturously slow. It's 5 hours minimum for most professional golfers, which is a long time to be out on the golf course. And as you say, the tours tend to follow the weather. They tend to follow the sun. So there's a challenge there. And then after the round as well. So Gavin, I know you were talking a little bit earlier about before the round, and kind of, or in preparation for the round in terms of fueling yourself ready with your breakfast. So it'd be great maybe for you to dive in here and look at that early part and maybe ask Tara a couple of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really confused by different products on the market that look healthy or that look like they're the right things that you should be fueling your body with, and actually couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, obviously we're talking about taking on fluids, you know, water being probably the number one, and then you've got different energy drinks. You know, early in my career, Red Bull was a huge part of my warm-up routine, 2 cans of which I would consume and wonder why I had the yips and the jitters. Crazy. But, you know, especially for kids now, you know, they walk into a pro shop and they see all these lovely glitzy colors of food product at the counter, and they buy it. And, you know, I think it's a common problem with so much of what we consume anyway nowadays, not just in sport, but,
Yeah.
you know, there's so much, I think, wrong with these at the counter snacks and things that kids especially eat that's really detrimental to their performance. So what should we do if we've got kids that are, let's say, between, you know, the ages of 8 and 12, 13, something like that? What would be ideal for the kids in terms of preparing them nutritionally for 2 hours worth of golf?
Okay. Well, I want ideally, and you know, of course, it depends on timing of what time they're starting. So either way, I want everyone to always eat breakfast. And my rule of thumb is to eat something within an hour of getting up. And so at meals, I also want 3 things at every single meal: some kind of carbohydrate source, some kind of protein, and some kind of fruit and or vegetable. So if they're going to be having breakfast, let's say before they're coming out, you know, are they grabbing donuts and pastries and really high fat, high sugar stuff? What that's going to do is potentially give them a bellyache with the high fat, but the sugar can tend to give a spike and then a drop. And that can happen with some of those energy drinks that you were talking about too. You know, you get sort of this rush from the sugar and the caffeine, and then what goes up must come down. And then you can often get a drop from that. So, you know, a more nutritious carbohydrate from, I mean, you could have waffles, pancakes, bagels, you know, English muffins, toast, you know, any of those biscuits, any of those kinds of things are fine. But also combine that with some kind of a protein, because if you just do carbs alone, your body just takes those carbohydrates, you know, that's our body's preferred source of energy. So it just says, ooh, carbs, 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 and it uses that for energy. But again, you kind of do this up, down, up, down, up, down thing. So if you have the protein in there too, that helps to give you that little sustained energy. So if it's, you know, a morning round, a morning practice, maybe having some eggs with it or some nice high quality yogurt. You know, here in the US, we love our Greek yogurt. And, you know, we do, of course, don't do the traditional high fat Greek yogurt, because in the US we like low fat stuff. So, you know, the low fat Greek yogurt, but it has a decent amount of protein in it. You know, you could do, you know, in a lot of the European countries, they like to do, you know, some of the different various meats in the morning. So as long as I don't really, not that I don't care, but I just want some kind of protein. It could be protein powder in a smoothie, you know, especially for kids. You know, they may not want to eat anything, but you can get them to drink something. And so if you can get them to drink a smoothie that has some protein powder and has some fruit, and you could even throw, you know, some flax seeds or a little bit of oats in the smoothie for some energy, or have them eat, you know, some biscuits along with, or some toast along with their smoothie. You know, that way you're getting kind of all of these things. The fruits and vegetables, I like at every single meal, because that also gives you those carbohydrates, but it also gives you a lot of those vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and all of that that can protect our cells as we're exercising, and helps us protect from injury and inflammation and things like that. So I know that was kind of a long answer to your question, but you know, not just grabbing something at the convenience store. You know, what I always say is with nutrition, there's 2 P words that people don't like to do, but can make a huge difference. And that's preparation and planning. So if you can just plan a little bit ahead and maybe prepare the night before, so that, you know, especially breakfast, because everybody's still groggy eyed, and especially for your junior players, you know, they don't want to sit there and prepare anything. And so as parents, it lands on our responsibility or the coach's responsibility to say, what are you having? So, you know, having that oatmeal ready to go, or doing overnight oats that you can just stick in the microwave and it's ready to go, or they can eat it cold. And, you know, cereal, or just have that bagel ready to pop into the toaster or whatever. So, you know, having things already like, this is planned ahead, like I know what I'm going to have for breakfast, that can take half the battle out of it, is just knowing what I'm going to have, and have that banana sitting there. So it's very easy to grab. You know, we all are in a very fast-paced world. And if the good food isn't there in front of us, we're not going to do it. So, you know, that's a trick with kids too, is just having the fruit cut up right in front of them, and they'll eat it. But they're not going to go in the fridge and get the strawberries and wash them and cut off the hull. Heck no. But if we do that for them and put it on a plate, they'll eat it.
Yeah. But yeah, the wonderful world of marketing, isn't it? You know, you walk into the pro shops, and I think Gavin and I know, and me, Gavin, with Leadbetter Kids, there's a specific whole course designed around about engaging the parents and helping educate the parents. And, you know, parents want what's best for the kids, but sometimes they just need a little bit better information. And like you've just pointed out, there's that preparation and that planning. And I think a lot of us know what the right type of foods are to eat, but maybe don't know what the benefits are from those types of foods. And again, it just avoids walking into the pro shop last minute. Yeah, just grab those couple of bars off the counter. That the packaging, as Gavin says, looks all glitzy and glam, and it's marketed as being this brilliant product for you, but the reality is it's just full of nonsense. So yeah, and
it's not to say that everything that's packaged is you know, junk. It just depends. You have to look at it and kind of examine it. And I'd rather you have a packaged bar than nothing. You know, at the end of the day, I'd rather you eat something than nothing. But let's not get to the point where it's an afterthought and, oh no, I'm about to go, you know, work out for 2-3 hours and I haven't had anything to eat yet today. Let's, you know, we got a preparation and plan before that happens, so that we're not always, you know, thinking in the afterthought type of scenario.
When you're hungry or when you are thirsty, of course, it's often too late, isn't it? And you then end up consuming the wrong things. I remember a few years ago, I was running the Chicago Marathon, and I think it was around about mile 14. They had about a 25-meter donut stand, and so I've had a beautiful donut with jam in the middle, with a Gatorade gel pack, and of course all hell broke loose about a mile later. But you know, I was so hungry, I just needed to consume and gouge on stuff. And certainly when the kids get 12, 13, 14 years old, and they're growing so quickly, they're consuming so many calories, they're playing 18 holes and they're walking and it's hot. You know, if they run out of food, then they'll just end up buying just anything to eat, of course. And then you get these massive sugar rushes, and then you get the big trough. And that is wholly attributable to inconsistent performance. So, you know, planning is really important, but they also need to make sure that part of that plan is the right sort of quantity too.
Right. Well, and yeah, I mean, you brought up a couple of good points there. It's quantity, and it's that planning ahead and packing it into the bag, so that when they are on the course, you know, it's not a couple holes in where their stomach starts growling and they start getting lightheaded. And, you know, again, it's that emergency type of a thing. So, and I always encourage that practice is a time for, and training is a time to practice what you're going to do in competition. So, you know, your Chicago Marathon example is perfect, that, you know, you would never eat a donut in the middle of a run in practice. But you were desperate and it looked good. And so you grabbed this whatever.
It looks so
and
good. All the colors. Oh, yeah.
yeah. Well, when I ran the Paris Marathon, they had wine and, salami and all those meats and stuff at mile like 22. I did not embark in those, but so yeah, on a marathon course, you never know what you're going to find. But that's the thing, as I always tell athletes, is practice is to practice your nutrition too. So what are you going to have? What's available when you're, in a hotel room and you're, ready to play that tournament? What are you going to eat? Well, practice that when you're at home. If the only thing that's available is a packet of oatmeal or the bagel or the, whatever, then that's what you practice at home to see how does that sit in my stomach, and what do you bring on course when you're in practice. That's what you need to train your stomach to accept, because your stomach is very finicky, especially on competition day, because we're nervous and all that adrenaline and that kind of stuff. And so you're already like a little bit of kind of that shaky stomach. Yeah. So if I can put something in that I know, okay, at this hole, I always have a banana, then even mentally, we know that our brain, our mental, can overpower so many things. So if I know that, that banana always sits in my stomach well, and I'm used to having a banana on course, and, so I'm going to do that, or dried fruit or trail mix, or, I could come up with lots of different things that you could pack into your bag, but you need to decide what works for you. And that's what you practice at practice, so that on competition day, on tournament day, that's where all right, this is tried and true. I know what I'm doing. And you have a plan.
It's funny, having coached at college in South Carolina, my job as the golf coach was literally to be the chief snack provider, and every college coach will relate to this. You carry all the snacks in the cooler on the back of the cart, and you make sure that you've got the right foodstuffs for your 5 players out there, and it better be the right stuff, otherwise that's it, you're the worst coach ever. And of course it's going to be individualized, and it really was back in those days. I'd have almost 5 meal plans for each individual, and we did practice it, to be fair. But I first saw back then, this was 2008, 2009, I first saw back then the effects of making sure that they were primarily correctly hydrated, which started at least the night before, and of course correctly fueled, which started at least the day before, and carried on maintaining levels rather than letting your levels drop. And I think that was really important as a strategy for me with my 5 teammates.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that it does. It starts with, previous to. And so yeah, definitely hydration can happen in the days prior, and you can actually even do some of those, higher sodium. So what sodium does is it actually helps you to maintain a little bit more fluid in your cells. And so that's why we want that sodium during exercise, one, because we're losing a lot of sodium, but it actually can help us. So I actually, for a lot of athletes, I'll have them do a high sodium, drink the day before, night before, morning of, so that they're getting as much fluid on board when they're, at the start line or at the beginning of that competition. And that will help them, again, to be ahead of the game rather than already starting when they're behind the game. Same thing with carbohydrate stores and all of that, and so making sure that we're keeping ourselves properly fueled. We have those carbohydrates on board. We have our glycogen stores full of energy, ready to help me concentrate, help me, get from one hole to the other.
Yeah. And of course, my final point being that we save the donuts for the car ride home.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, again, when you think about that stressed stomach, fat is going to irritate the stomach. So that's why I don't recommend the high fat foods before competition. So if you got an afternoon tee off, you know, the very greasy burger and French fries, probably not going to be the best thing to do. But if you want to reward yourself after with that hamburger and fries, have at it. You know, that's
in the back of the van, won't it?
so that's, you know, that's up to you. But, you know, depending on what are you doing again tomorrow and, you know, that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's the thing with athletes is there's very few off days. There's very few days where we don't need to be thinking about nutrition and we can just sort of, you know, let it all go. And the other thing that I try to emphasize with athletes too is that, you know, you're putting so much time and energy and effort into this particular sport. Why not just take this extra level and think about what you're putting in your body? If you want to eat, you know, pizza and donuts and French fries, you know, after you're retired, have at it. But while you're trying to really compete and be at your best, let's try to really focus on, you know, putting the right fuel into your body so that you can have that focus and concentration and energy and endurance and strength and all of that. And so, you know, that I talked about, you know, day after day after day of training, and that's where nutrition really comes in, is in that recovery. You know, the injuries, the overuse injuries, the lack of recovery is often, you know, it can be sleep, it can be all kinds of things, but it often is lack of fueling soon enough after exercise, the dehydration, or just fueling with the wrong things that aren't properly giving me the nutrients I need to repair all these muscles that I'm using and abusing along the way.
That's perfect.
Absolutely. I think for me, Tara, I think you touched on something that really struck probably a bit of a nerve for me, and I get it a lot when you're training players, whether it's aspiring juniors or players that are trying to be the best that they can be, and they'll do something in the practice that's kind of nonchalant. They go, "Oh, well, I wouldn't do that in a tournament." You go, "Well, why would you let yourself do it in training? Because if you let yourself do it in training, the habits will come in at some point under pressure in a tournament." And you said something very, very similar when Gavin was asking the question, is, you know, making sure that you've got those good habits and you're doing things repetitively there. And I think that was something that really struck a chord with me, is I'm quite big with players that I work on, is if we're on the putting green and we're hauling out, you're going to haul everything out. There's no gimmies. You can't just pick it up because it's only that far away. Because at some point in your career, you'll have to walk up and you'll have to tap that in, or you'll have to haul the 3-footer for a birdie or for a par or for a bogey to make the cut or to win the tournament or to beat your opponent. And I guess with nutrition, and I know I'm guilty of it because I'm probably not the best at staying hydrated and always eating the right things, but it does start with making good decisions and creating good habits, doesn't it? And I think in the world of golf, one of my questions was, one, how important is that from an early age in terms of the parents' influence and then players making the right decisions? And the other one is, do you think that in your experience that nutrition now is being much more accepted amongst players and coaches as being a real integral part of performance in the golfing world? Because we see it in other sports that it's been embedded for years, and you'll see it working with basketball and WWE and tennis and all the other federations and organizations you've worked with, that it's been there for years. You know much better the internal workings and whether that's really embedded or not, but from the outside we look at it and go, well, why has it never really been that accepted in golf? But be interesting to hear your take on it being from the industry about how much more accepted it is and how much better it's got, or does it need to be a lot better? And about creating habits, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love it when I hear stories like Tom Brady and Djokovic and, some of these leaders in their own sport. I mean, the greatest of all time, kind of thing, who start talking about their diet and how they have cleaned up their diet. And you see a transformation, sometimes physically, and sometimes it's just in their play, and their longevity. You can't argue with looking at some of these athletes that tout nutrition and see, how good and how long they've really been playing. So I think, to answer your question, I hope that we do see this more and more in golf. And we've seen, a few examples here and there of people talking about their nutrition and their hydration. But, hopefully we will definitely see more of those examples. But, especially in our youth, they look up to those kinds of people and say, oh, maybe I should think about this. And to answer your other question about, how soon should it start? I kind of have a soapbox about feeding, feeding kids. And so I'll give you an example. I had a high school athlete I was working with, this is many years ago, and I said something about blueberries and, just fruit in general. I was trying to get him to eat fruit, and we were talking about fruit, and I said something about blueberries. He goes, I don't think I've ever had a blueberry. Okay, this was a 16-year-old kid. And I looked at him, he goes, I think I've had like a blueberry muffin, but I've never had like blueberries. And I thought, what kid has never actually eaten a blueberry? Like, that was shocking to me, but it's eye-opening to think, if you don't feed your kids these things from an early age, they're not going to all of a sudden turn into 18-year-olds and go, broccoli, where have you been my whole life? So we have to show it to them, feed them, role model, all of that from an early age, so that they do accept it. And, there's lots of research around, you have to try it 10 times before your taste buds, accept it. And, vegetables are naturally bitter. And so, but your taste buds actually become more accustomed to that bitter flavor the more they get exposed to it. So yeah, the first time, you put the broccoli in your kid's mouth and they go, ah, and they're spitting it all out. Yeah. Don't say that, oh, well, they're never going to eat broccoli. No, that was one time. And so, encouraging those good behaviors. And again, I can't emphasize role modeling enough too, as parents and as coaches. If they see you, even as a coach, when you're on the road and traveling and eating and all of that together, and you're eating the junk food and telling them, no, you can't have this, you have to eat that. What kind of a message is that sending too? Because I want you to perform at your best as a coach as well. Absolutely. And that is what you're putting into your body too, and hydrating and paying attention to all those things. So, I can't emphasize that enough, that everyone working with youth, they see us, they see what you're doing, not just what you're saying. And you've probably realized this already if you're a youth coach. But, it comes with the nutrition territory too. And, I always joke that people are always watching me, of course, because they expect me to be perfect and for me to never touch anything bad. And I'm like, hey, I'm human first and dietitian second. I love pizza, chocolate, French fries, just like anybody else. But it's all in the balance, how often, how much, when, all of that plays into it. And so that's what you kind of learn about yourself. And I really encourage some of the youth and adults too that I work with to keep like a food journal, not necessarily to count calories and stuff like that, but just keep a journal of lots of different things, but keep a journal of like, how is this affecting me, in my clarity? And, today I just felt really foggy, and maybe look back to, what did I have for breakfast? Or what did I have last night? Or how was my sleep last night? Or, any of those kinds of things. So we can start to connect some of the dots that, yeah, it really does make a difference in your play or your energy or your recovery or something like that. So if you can write it down and then see trends, that's really powerful.
Yeah, brilliant. I think one final question for me, I think as coaches sometimes, and naturally, as you said before, everybody's a bit different, all the athletes or the golfers you work with, and there's maybe not a perfect answer for this, but you're out there for 18 holes, it can last around 5 hours. There's two things for me. One, I found dealing with players, a lot of players find it really awkward if they have a 10:30 or an 11 o'clock tee time. And it means that they're really not going to get chance to have a proper sit down lunch, if you like. They've got to have lunch on the go, so they struggle with that. And the other one is during the round, do you feel that there are certain periods, like within the first 3 or 6 holes, you should consume some carbs, and then the next few holes should be some fiber, or should it be fiber first, then carbs? Do you need some sugar at some point? Is there a combination through the period of time, through the 18 holes, that you would, if you were going to build a snack pack, that you would say, right, hole 3, hole 7, hole whatever, roughly, this is what we'd like you to consume, and then they choose a food product that meets that criteria?
Exactly. Yeah. Having a fuel plan is going to be key. And you can't wait, just like in your marathon, you can't wait until mile 20 to start with the sports drinks and gels, because that's when the race begins and you've hit the wall. You can't catch up at that point. So if you wait until hole 16 of 18, when you start to feel really depleted, it's going to be really hard to catch up. So yeah, maybe 3 holes in, and then another, every 3 holes or so, is kind of a good rule of thumb. And again, everybody's going to be a little bit different depending on how much you want. So if you want half a banana, maybe you do it a little bit more often, or, 1 bite of a banana, and then the next hole you do another bite of banana if you don't want that whole banana all at one time, or something like that. So everybody's going to be a little bit different with how much they want to eat at one time. If you eat very little, then more often. But if you can eat a decent amount, then, maybe you spread it out a little bit more. But definitely having that plan of, don't go more than 3 to 4 holes without some kind of carbohydrate, electrolyte, fluid. And those are like the 3 big things that we need on course: is some kind of fluid, some kind of electrolyte, and some kind of food or, carbohydrate coming in. So a sports drinks has all 3, but, again, for 5 hours, is that going to sustain you for that whole time? Do I want to drink that much sports drink, or do I want some water, some sports drink, and some real food, some dried fruit, some salted trail mix? Because again, we want the salt. We want the salt in there. So, so those are all things that you can, again, kind of play around with. And that's what I work with individually with athletes to try to figure out. And as coaches, you can help them to figure that out. Like, here are a whole bunch of ideas with, that players I've worked in the past like to do. What do you think tastes good and want to, feel like eating when you're on the course? I don't want to force feed something that you absolutely hate, because you're not going to do it. It's not going to be sustainable. There's lots of options out there. Mm-hmm. So, whether it's a fruit leather thing that just like dried fruit kind of a thing versus, the banana. I don't care. It's carbohydrates and it's some potassium and it's giving you what I'm looking for. I don't care if it's fresh or dried, but let's find what you like to do.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. So I think, Gavin, maybe you have a question, but I know we've got the listeners there. It'd be great if anybody has any questions that they want to drink. I think, Jennifer, you've got a question if you want to open your microphone up there.
Hi, I was just wondering, because you were talking about sports drinks, and I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is a Gatorade, but I don't think that's probably the best thing. So I was just wondering what best electrolytes you suggest to your athletes.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't have a problem with Gatorade. I think, they're a leader in the industry for a reason. They've done a lot of research around how much concentration of sugar do we need during physical activity, how much electrolyte do we need? But again, every body is different. And the game of golf is lower intensity versus, a lot of other sports that are higher intensity. So maybe they don't need quite as much sugar, but they do need the electrolytes because they're sweating a lot in that hot sun and, all of that. So it really depends. You know, you can do like a Nuun, that the NUUN electrolytes that have the electrolytes but not the sugar, or you could combine that, you know, maybe water down the Gatorade a little bit, but then add a Nuun to it. So you've got more electrolyte, little bit less sugar, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, again, that's where body size, intensity, sweat rate, you know, what's in their sweat in terms of how much sodium are they losing, all of those things can be factors in that. And, you know, of course, there's lots of other brands of electrolyte. You know, you've got really, really high sodium ones, like Salt Stick and The Right Stuff, and even Pedialyte. I have a lot of tennis juniors that use Pedialyte, and it gets a little expensive. It's not cheap, but they like the taste of it, and it's nice and high sodium. So that can even be an option for some of the juniors on the course.
Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic.
Very good. I've got 10 quick fire questions for you.
10?
You just have to, I'm going to give you a choice of 2 foods, and you have to
Okay,
give me the best one.
Oh, I like this. Okay.
You can only say one of them. I'll start off with an easy one. Okay. Blueberry or blackberry?
Blueberry or blackberry?
Yeah.
Blackberry.
Gatorade or water?
Depends.
No. Pick one.
I can't answer that. I like Gatorade. I like a sports drink on course because you need, again, the fluid and the electrolytes and the sugar.
That's a cop out. Muffin or granola bar?
Granola bar.
Apple or banana?
Banana.
Banana. Nuts or raisins?
On course?
Yes.
Raisins.
Pasta or rice?
Both good. All right, I'll pick pasta.
Excellent. Not on course.
No.
McDonald's or Subway?
Subway.
Melon or orange?
Orange.
Diet Coke or iced tea?
Iced tea.
Final one. Tequila or vodka?
Is it a shot or a mixed drink?
And you, Tara, you can say both.
Both together. No, not together.
Very good. Well played. You scored 4 out of 10.
All right, all right. Was that a how compatible are our eating choices together, Gavin?
I scored 10 out of 10 to be fair, but
oh,
yeah,
of course, because you made it up. Oh gosh, no, that was fun.
Thank you, Stuart.
No, fantastic. Well, Tara, I think, you know, you brought some great insights into nutrition. I think one thing before we wrap things up, what would be great, one of our goals for Gavin and I every week with the Under the Hat series is we appreciate our instructors around the world are busy and all on different time zones, so they can't always get to be live on the sessions, but they do watch it on catch up. But it's really to try and help everybody each week add at least one coaching tool to their coaching toolbox. That's something that they maybe develop a little reflection point and go away and research, or they go, actually, I can implement that on the tee tomorrow, but just fuels their ongoing learning and hopefully their development. So in the world that you're involved in your experience with golfers, I'd be really keen to hear some of the pitfalls that you've seen coaches fall into, and maybe 1 or 2 tips that they could really put into practice straight away tomorrow that you think would be beneficial for their students in the world of nutrition.
Sure. I think one of my biggest tips is to be proactive rather than reactive. So that kind of comes to that preparation and planning idea, that if you're always reactive and, oh no, I'm crashing, whatever, I didn't pack enough, I didn't bring enough fluid, then you're gonna be crashing and burning. But if you're proactive around, asking your athlete, what do you have in your bag for on course? What do you have in your bottle? How big is your bottle? That kind of stuff, to make sure that you're teaching them to be proactive. What did you have for breakfast this morning? Did you have breakfast this morning? Asking some of those questions around their fueling. I think that's, just starting the conversation is huge around nutrition. And you don't have to get necessarily into the nitty gritty of, counting carbs and protein and all that. Refer them to a sports dietitian for nitty gritty questions like that. But just the simple awareness of, you need to eat before you go on course. What do you have in your bag so that you have something on course? That is half the battle.
No, brilliant. No, I love it. So, I mean, on behalf of Gavin, myself, and everybody that's listening today, I'd love to thank you for your time today, Tara. I know we've spoke a couple of times, and the likelihood is we're going to be doing some great work together in the future across all of our platforms and our kind of areas of development in golf, whether it's grassroots and junior level that Gavin looks after, to the Elite Junior Academy, to helping all of our instructors around the world. So on behalf of us, thank you for giving us your insights, your knowledge, your time, and thank you to you guys for joining us today as well. Next week we have David on board, so 3 o'clock Eastern time next week, 8 p.m. in the UK. We've got David on to do a little Masters wrap up and a Q&A as well. So Tara, once again, thanks for your time, and we'll
pleasure.
be speaking soon. Okay,
Sounds
thank you, everybody.
good.